Good morning, everyone. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Naufal Faras, a student from the Information System major at Venus University, with student ID 250-215-2054. Today, I will be presenting a topic titled Building Modern Website Easily with Tailwind CSS. Web development today is evolving very quickly. Websites are becoming more interactive, more responsive, and more complex than ever before. Because of this, developers need tools that allows them to work faster while still maintaining clean and maintainable code. One of the biggest challenges in web development is managing CSS, especially when a project becomes large and involves many components and pages. Because of that, many modern developers use tools like Tailwind CSS to simplify the styling process and make development more efficient. In this presentation, I will explain what CSS is, the common problems developers face with traditional CSS, and how Tailwind CSS helps solve those problems. Before we begin, let's take a look at learning outcomes of these presentations, and by the end of this, you will be able to understand three main things. First, you will understand what CSS is and why it is an essential part of every website. Second, you will understand the common problems that developers experience when using traditional or vanilla CSS in real-world projects. And third, you will understand why Tailwind CSS is considered a better approach for modern web development, especially when working with component-based frameworks such as React, Vue, or Svelte. Even if you are not a web developer, this presentation will help you understand how modern websites are designed and built. Okay, now let's start with the basics. What is exactly the CSS? When we build websites, we usually use three core technologies: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML defines the structure of the page. For example, HTML tells the browser that something is a heading, a paragraph, a button, or an image. However, if we only use HTML without CSS, the websites will look very plain and unstyled. This is where CSS comes in. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet, and its main role is to control the visual of the website. With CSS, we can control things such as colors, font size, spacing, layouts, animation, and responsiveness for different screen size. Another technology is JavaScript. JavaScript controls the behavior of the website. For example, when a user clicks a button, JavaScript can show a pop-up, load data, or animate elements. A simple way to understand this is to imagine a website as a human body. HTML is like a skeleton and muscles that define the structure of the body. CSS is like clothing, hairstyle, and appearance that make a person look different. And JavaScript is like the brain that controls the actions and behavior of that person. All three technologies work together to create modern websites. Now, how CSS works. Now let's take a look at how CSS affects a website. Without CSS, a web page will appear with the browser default styles. Everything will look very simple and sometimes messy. Headings will just appear as a plain text, button will have default styles, and there will be little control over spacing or layout. However, when CSS is applied, we can completely transform the visual appearance of the website. For example, we can change the color of text, adjust font size, and spacing in between of the elements. Another important capability of CSS is responsiveness. Responsive designs mean that websites can adapt to different screen sizes, such as desktop, tablets, and smartphone. And this is extremely important today because many users access websites through mobile devices. And as to give an example, without CSS, the elements is like a plane, and with CSS, the style is more modern and then more crafted to this website. And this is take an example from the Tokopedia website. And the next topic is CSS syntax. CSS syntax or CSS rules are built from three main parts. The first part is the selector. The selector determines which HTML element we want to style. For example, we might target a button element or an element with specific class name. The second part is the property. The property describes what aspect of the elements we want to change, such as background color, font size, padding, margin, or border radius. The third part is the value. The value determines how the property should look. For example, if we want a blue button, we might set the background color property to blue. Although the structure is simple, managing many CSS rules across a large project can become very complicated. Now let's talk about the problem that developers often face when using traditional or vanilla CSS. The first problem is context switching. Developers usually have to work with two separate files, the HTML and CSS files. Every time they want to adjust a new style, they need to switch between these files. This constant switching can slow down development. The second problem is naming class. Developer must create their own class names for every element, such as cart, product cart, cart header, and many more. Naming things consistently across a team can actually be very difficult. The third problem is style conflict. Sometimes a CSS rule intended for one part of the website accidentally affect another part. This can cause unexpected design issues. Another problem is unused CSS. Over time, projects accumulate many CSS rules that are no longer used. Developers are often afraid to delete them because they might break something. As a result, CSS files become very large and difficult to maintain. There is where TailwindCSS comes in. TailwindCSS is a utility-first CSS framework that allows developers to style the website using small, single-purpose classes directly in the HTML. Instead of writing custom CSS rules in a separate file, developers apply predefined utility classes directly to the HTML. For example, instead of writing CSS to add padding, colors, and border radius, developers can simply use classes that already exist in Tailwind. This approach has three main advantages. First, utility classes provide small instructions that do exactly one thing. Second, styles are written directly inside the HTML, which means developers do not need to constantly switch between files. Third, Tailwind provides a built-in design system with consistent spacing, colors, and typography. This helps maintain visual consistency across the entire website. At first glance, Tailwind CSS classes might look unusual because there can be many classes in one single element. However, each class is very simple and easy to understand. For example, a class might control padding, another controls color, and another class controls font size. When developers learn how to read these classes, they can quickly understand what style an element has without opening another CSS file. This improves readability and makes the code easier to maintain. Okay, now let's compare the traditional approach with the Tailwind approach. With vanilla CSS, developers usually need to manage multiple files, HTML files, and separate CSS files. They also need to invent class names and worry about style conflict. With Tailwind CSS, styles are applied directly in the HTML. Everything stays in one place. This makes it easier to read, easier to modify, and easier to maintain. Let's summarize how Tailwind solves the problem we discussed earlier. First, it eliminates constant switching between HTML and CSS files. Second, the developers no longer need to invent class, custom class names, and any other names. And third, utility classes prevent style conflicts because each class affects only one specific property. And finally, Tailwinds automatically remove unused styles during the build process, which keeps the final CSS very small. Now, modern websites are often built using frameworks like React, Vue, or Svelte. These frameworks use a component-based architecture. This means a website is built from many small reusable components such as buttons, cards, navigation bars, and forms. Each component contains its own logic, structure, and styles. Tailwinds works very well with this approach because styles live directly inside the component. This means when a component is moved or deleted, its styles move or disappear automatically. So it makes it very easy to apply conditional styles based on the user action. For example, in React, we can easily change style dynamically using simple logic. If a button is active, we might give it a blue background. If it is inactive, we might give it a gray background. With Tailwind, this can be done directly in the component code without writing additional CSS rules. This makes development faster and reduce complexity. So 6 reasons Tailwind is better in component-based apps. First one is styles travel with the component, and it have zero CSS leakage, and it have conditional styles are trivial. Also shared design token across all components, no build-up of unused styles, and fast iteration without breaking others. So the conclusion, CSS has always been the backbone of visual web design, but writing it by hand for a large project creates friction, inconsistency, and bloat. Tailwind CSS was built to eliminate exactly these problems. By offering a rich vocabulary or utility classes applied directly in the HTML, Tailwind removes the need for a separate style sheet, class naming decision, and specificity debugging. The result is faster development, more consistent design, and code that is far easier to read and maintain. And Tailwind CSS version 4 takes this even further, removing the JavaScript config file entirely and introducing a pure CSS native theming system with theme syntax and shipping a Rust-powered compiler that makes a build nearly instant. For teams using component-based framework like React or Vue, Tailwind is the ideal styling partner. Styles live alongside the code they style, move with components when refactored, and never accidentally leak across the code base. And yeah, that's the presentation about how we can build modern website using Tailwind CSS. Thank you so much for your attention, everyone. And here I also attach the reference for uh, the materials that I built. So hopefully can help you to understand more about this topic. Again, thank you so much, everyone, and have a good day ahead.